former Metropolitan Police officer Wayne Couzens has been sentenced to 19 months in prison at the Old Bailey after admitting 3 incidents of indecent exposure committed in the months before he kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard. He has now been sentenced to 19 months in jail. This is on top of his his whole life jail sentence for the murder of Ms Everard. We can listen to a section of what Mrs Justice May told him in sentencing a short while ago.
For the offence against A, count 2 on indictment number T 2022-0638, the sentence is one of 19 months imprisonment. There will be concurrent sentences of 6 months on each of counts 2 and 3 on indictment T 2022-0320. The total sentence is accordingly one of 19 months. As I have already said, to the existing whole-of-life sentence from which the defendant will never be released.
Well, Mrs Justice May talked about the fact that his pattern of behaviour had continued and the fact that these cases of indecent exposure had not led to any police action. And she said the fact that no police came to find you can only have served to increase your belief in your ability to dominate women sexually without being caught. And she talked about the victims and how they have felt about this, how they have felt shock about the aggressive exposure and how one of them has really felt enormous remorse that had she realised at the time what this man was capable of, and perhaps if the police had taken more action at the time, it would have meant that he would have been arrested at the time. This is important, of course, because Wayne Couzens, who's serving a whole life sentence for the murder of Ms Everard, was a serving Metropolitan Police officer at the time, and he carried out these offences that he has been found guilty for today. One of them happened when he was actually meant to be on duty. He was working from home. The other one happened when he used a credit card in his own name and would have been aware that his car would have had its number plate captured as he went to pay for fast food at a fast food restaurant and exposed himself to the woman who was working there. We can now talk to our correspondent Matthew Thompson, who is at the Old Bailey for us. Matthew Thompson, he had pleaded guilty to these 3 charges, so he would be expecting a relatively hefty sentence, but this will just be added to his whole life jail sentence, won't it?
It will, yes. So it's 19 months in total for the 3 offences of indecent exposure. That breaks down as 19 months for the first offence, which took place in Woodlands in Kent in November of 2020, and then a subsequent 2 sentences of 6 months each for the later incidents, which were at the fast food restaurants in Kent in February of 2020. But all of those sentences are going to be served concurrently at the same time, which means a total, if you like, of 19 months in prison. Of course, in some ways that is academic, because as the judge made clear, Wayne Couzens is already serving a whole life sentence in prison in HMP Frankland in County Durham for the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard in 2021. And so he will die in prison whatever happens. But the judge was, I thought, very interesting on exactly why it was important that he be sentenced for those other crimes, even if it made no practical difference to the amount of time that he would spend in prison. She said it was first and foremost important for the administration of justice, for a public recognition that these crimes took place, but also for some form of restitution for the victims. And as well, she said, to recognise the bravery of the victims for coming forward. Without them, without their actions in coming forward, she said justice would not be served. So for all those reasons, even if it is slightly academic, the judge said it was very important that he be sentenced for those crimes. In terms of the facts of what happened, it was interesting to see them set out at some length. In terms of the first incident, which the judge deemed to be the most serious, Couzens was in Woodlands in Kent in November 2020. He stepped out as a passing lone female cyclist was passing by, completely naked, and began to pleasure himself in front of her. And she then reported it to police. She did actually pass his car as she was cycling off, but only had a partial remembrance of his license plate. And so for that reason, the police said they were unable to progress the investigation any further. Then what happened in the February of 2021 was Mr. Couzens was using a drive-through at a fast food restaurant in Kent. He exposed himself to two female members of staff at the fast food restaurant. There is CCTV footage of Couzens' car with its license plate in full view. Also, he used his own credit card to pay for the food, and so the restaurant had a copy of the receipt with his credit card number. But that first incident on Valentine's Day, on the 14th of February, was not actually reported to police, not at least until 2 weeks later, when he did the same thing again. And again, there was CCTV footage. And again, he used the same credit card. So there was records of that. The following day, it was reported to police, and the fact that it was the same credit card as a similar incident that had happened 2 weeks before, but nothing was done. Couzens was not interviewed or contacted by police. And as we know, tragically, less than a week later, he went on to commit the rape, kidnap and murder of Sarah Everard. So this is, if you like, Couzens' potentially, unless new allegations emerge, of course, Couzens' last day in court. But what attention will now turn to is the extent to which there may have been options, possibilities for stopping him at some point. Had police investigated, for example, an incident that took place in Kent in 2015 when his number plate was taken? Had they investigated any of the incidents in November through to February 2021? Could they have stopped Couzens? Could they have done enough to at least get him suspended from his role as a police officer, which, as we know, tragically he used to then trick Sarah Everard into getting into his car? In fact, he arrested her, didn't he? So there are many options potentially for investigating what went wrong in the police investigations themselves. That is all, of course, the subject of a Home Office inquiry under Dame Angiolini, which is taking place as we speak. So that is where the attention will turn. We know now, of course, as we did even prior to today, that Wayne Couzens will spend the rest of his life in prison. But now, for important reasons explained by the judge, he's added to that another sentence of 19 months for several counts of indecent exposure.